morning Sloane Whitfield called me into her office. I had already made my son's breakfast, argued with a gas station pump that refused 3 different cards before accepting the 4th, and missed a turn on the highway because I was listening to Jake answer a question wrong on a podcast trivia segment playing through my car speakers and felt personally offended on his behalf. That was my life at 32. Not glamorous, not complicated, not the kind of life that prepared you for surprises delivered behind closed office doors. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina, 20 minutes from the Whitfield Group's regional headquarters, with a son named Tobias who was 14, annoyingly perceptive, and had a talent for making me feel like I was failing some test I hadn't studied for. "You ironed this shirt wrong," he said that morning, standing in the kitchen doorway in basketball shorts and a hoodie he had definitely slept in. "I didn't iron it. I put it in the dryer." "Yeah, that's the problem. The shirt looks fine. The shirt looks like it made a life choice and regrets it." I looked down at it. I looked back at him, file a complaint with someone who asked. He poured cereal without responding, which meant he was satisfied. That was how most mornings went. Small corrections, missing sports socks, a backpack that ended up in exactly the spot I asked him not to leave it, every single day like the request simply did not process. I complained about it. But if I'm being honest, I liked the weight of it. I liked being the person who knew where his mouthguard was, which teacher gave too much homework, which lunch option he'd actually eat versus the one he said he'd eat and then throw away. His mother left when he was 3, not a dramatic exit. She called it incompatibility, which was the cleanest word for something much messier. She moved to Portland, sends birthday cards with checks, shows up twice a year. Tobias is not angry about it anymore. He was for a while. Now he's just matter of fact, which is somehow sadder fact, which is somehow sadder. I stayed not because I had a plan, but because the alternative was unthinkable. My own father disappeared when I was 7, not dead, just gone, slowly, the way a radio signal fades when you drive too far from the tower. I knew what that sound felt like. I wasn't going to make Tobias learn it. At work, I was a project manager for the Whitfield Group commercial real estate development, mid-size by industry standards but serious enough that we had 3 floors in a downtown building and a reputation that meant something in the Carolinas market. I was good at it. I kept timelines from collapsing, contractors from lying about delays, and investors from panicking whenever the numbers shifted. I was not the person who showed up at charity dinners. I was the person who made sure the person at the charity dinner had something accurate to say. Sloane Whitfield was the CEO. She had taken over from her father 4 years ago, and in those 4 years the company had expanded into 2 new markets and shed the slightly inherited, slightly coasting energy that had defined it before her. She was 38. She had the kind of focus that made people straighten up without being told to. When she walked into a site meeting, the room recalibrated. I had worked under her for almost 3 years. We had professional respect. We did not have a personal relationship, or anything close to one. Then came the Donovan Project closing dinner. It was at a steakhouse downtown that the company used for the kind of event where everyone was supposed to feel celebrated but actually just felt evaluated. The Donovan deal had been 2 years in the making, and closing it meant Whitfield Group was entering the Atlanta market ahead of 2 larger competitors. People were in a good mood. There was good bourbon. I planned to stay through the speeches, shake the right hands, and leave before they brought out the cake, because the cake at these events was always dry and the speeches always ran long. That plan held until I ended up at the bar next to Sloane at around 9:30. She was still in her blazer. Most people had taken theirs off by then. She had a glass of wine that she had been holding for 40 minutes and barely touched. "You look like you're calculating something," I said. It was the bourbon talking, partly. She glanced at me. "I'm always calculating something, even tonight, especially tonight." She looked at the room. "Everyone in here thinks tonight means we've arrived. I'm thinking about the 3 things that could go wrong in Atlanta before the first permit clears." That's a terrible way to celebrate. It's the only way that keeps the celebration from becoming a problem. I laughed because I hadn't expected her to say it out loud. She looked at me like she was mildly surprised that I had. We talked for 20 minutes, then 40. I told her Tobias had recently informed me that my taste in music was, quote, forensic, meaning it belonged in a museum or a crime scene. She told me she had once been told by a board member that she smiled too infrequently for a company ambassador, and that she had responded by not smiling at him for 6 months. Did it work? I asked. He resigned for unrelated reasons, but I choose to see a connection. There was more wine on her end, a second bourbon on mine. The dinner thinned out. We ended up in a quieter corner of the restaurant than outside on the patio when the inside got loud again. At some point she said, "I don't want to manage anything for the rest of tonight." I understood that more than I should have admitted. The rest of that evening came in pieces, the way things do when you are tired and a little reckless and briefly forget the shape of your life. Her hotel 2 blocks away, a door closing. Her voice lower than in any conference room. The sensation of having briefly stepped out of the version of yourself that knows better. By morning, we were both dressed and quiet on opposite sides of the room. "This can't be anything," she said. "I know." She looked at me steadily. "I'm your employer." "I know that too." Something crossed her face. Not relief exactly. More like she had expected an argument and wasn't sure what to do with the absence of one. We left separately. I drove home, made Tobias eggs, told myself it had been 2 adults being briefly human in a way that would not happen again. 4 weeks later, Sloane's assistant called. "Ms. Whitfield would like to see you at 5. 5 o'clock was not her hour. By 5 she was usually in calls with investors or reviewing permit applications for the Atlanta build. When I arrived, the lights in her office were lower than usual. The blinds on the glass wall facing the hallway were closed. She was standing, not sitting, and there were no documents on her desk. "Close the door," she said. I did. The room was quiet in a specific way, like it had already heard what was about to be said and was waiting for me to catch up. She said, "I'm pregnant." She said, "It's yours." She said both things with the same steady voice she used to explain zoning complications to city council, like the words were just information. Like she had rehearsed being calm so many times that calm was all that was left. I sat down without being invited to. She stayed standing. "I've already made my decision," she said. "I'm keeping the baby. I'm not asking you for anything right now. I'm telling you so you can think." The word baby did something to the temperature of the room. Not situation, not complication. Baby, small and specific and real. I pressed both hands against my knees and tried to find the right sentence. There were 100 wrong ones available. About timing, about contracts, about what HR would say, what the board would say, what my own reflection would say at 6 in the morning. But underneath all of that, something settled in me that had nothing to do with strategy. "I'm not walking away," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Her expression barely shifted, but I could see it. She had prepared for negotiation, for conditions, maybe even for relief if I'd won a distance. She had not prepared for a plain answer. "You don't understand what this means for the company." "Not all of it, but I understand that part." She looked away first. When I left her office, the hallway looked exactly the same. Same carpet, same framed photos of completed developments, same people walking quickly with phones in their hands. But I took the elevator down feeling like the room behind me had been rearranged while I wasn't watching. The first few weeks we were careful. At work, nothing changed on the surface. She still led Monday briefings with the same precise energy. I still gave project updates, still negotiated contractor timelines, still argued for contingency budgets that finance looked at like I was asking them to fund a hobby. But every time she looked across the table at me, even for a second, I felt the thing we were not saying sitting in the air between us. Her first message came on a Tuesday night. "Can you meet before work Thursday? Somewhere off-site." Tobias was at the kitchen table pretending to do homework and actually watching something on his phone with one earbud in. "Who's texting you at 9? He asked without looking up. "Work." You made the face. "I don't have a face. You have several." "That one is the something happened and I don't know how to file it face." I put the phone face down on the counter. "Go to bed. It's 9. It's 9:15. Same zip code." I met Sloane Thursday at a coffee place on the west side of downtown. The kind with exposed brick and a handwritten menu and music no one under 40 recognized. She was already there when I arrived, sitting with her back to the wall, no jewelry except a watch, sunglasses still on even though we were inside. If anyone recognized her, they were professional enough not to show it. "You're early," I said. "So are you." "I'm always early." "I know." She said it simply. "I pay attention to my senior staff." "That's either reassuring or unsettling." "Both," she said. "That's the point." 2 coffees between us, both untouched. We were awkward in a way we had never been at work, where we had roles and agendas and things to look at. Here we just had the reason we were meeting. "I have an appointment Friday," she said. "Prenatal." "First one." I nodded. "Do you want me there?" She looked at her cup. "I don't know yet." "That's fine." She looked at me like that was the wrong answer in a way that wasn't entirely bad. "I'm used to knowing before I speak," she said. "I'm used to making breakfast while answering site emails and keeping track of whether Tobias left his cleats in the car again." The corner of her mouth moved. Almost a smile. Multitasking under pressure. I prefer gracefully overwhelmed. That became the pattern over the next 2 weeks. Coffee before work. Lunch once at a diner tucked between a tax office and a dry cleaner where no one from Whitfield Group would ever willingly eat. The soup tasted like warm cardboard. She ordered it anyway, took 2 bites, and then pushed it aside. "You could just say you hate it," I told her. "I chose it. Choosing something badly doesn't obligate you to finish it." She looked at me for a second. That might be the most useful thing anyone said to me this week. Those meetings started practical. Timelines, legal questions, how long she could keep things quiet before the board needed to know. But other things started coming through the edges. She asked about Tobias, not politely, specifically. What was he like? What did he care about? What made him difficult? What made him easy? I told her he was into basketball, true crime podcasts, anything mechanical that he could take apart and either fix or learn from its failure. I told her he used sarcasm the way some kids used crying to protect something underneath. I told her he once spent an entire Saturday helping a neighbor rewire a ceiling fan because the guy was 82 and Tobias didn't want him on a ladder. "He sounds like someone I'd want on my team," Sloan said. "He'd try to renegotiate his job title immediately. Smart, it's a problem." She almost smiled again. I was starting to recognize the shape of it. Quick, controlled, like she wasn't quite sure it was allowed. I told her more than I expected to. About Tobias's mom leaving. But the 2 years after where I learned to French braid hair badly and got better, learned which teachers needed weekly check-ins and which ones just needed to be left alone. Learned that the most important thing was showing up to the things that mattered even when you were exhausted and had 3 other things due. "My father left when I was 7, I said. So when Sarah left, I already knew what that cost. I wasn't going to make Tobias pay it." Sloan was quiet for a moment. She was good at quiet, not uncomfortable with it. Just waiting, letting things settle. "My father stayed," she said, "but he was never quite present. He built this company and gave it to me, and I'm not sure he ever once asked what I actually wanted." That was the first time she mentioned Richard Whitfield Sr. Not as a story. More like a fact. She was still deciding what to do with. By the 3rd week, I knew I had to tell Tobias. I waited until Sunday after dinner, which was foolish because there is no good time to tell your teenager that your boss is pregnant with your child. I waited until he was clearing dishes, which at least gave us both something to look at. "Hey," I said, "come sit for a second." He set a plate down and looked at me. That sentence never goes anywhere good. "I know." He pulled out a chair and sat across from me. He was already bracing. I could see it in the set of his shoulders, that thing he did where he got very still before something landed. "Something's happened that I should have told you sooner," I said, "and I need you to hear it from me, and I need you to know that nothing about us changes, not in the ways that matter." "Dad, Sloan Whitfield is pregnant." He stared at me. "You're Sloan Whitfield. She's not my Sloan Whitfield. Your boss Sloan Whitfield." "Yes?" Tobias put both hands flat on the table, the way he did when he was working through something and didn't want his face to do it for him. He looked at the table, then back at me. "And the baby is mine." He didn't move for a few seconds. Then he said quietly, "Is that why you've been weird?" "Yes." "Since when?" "About a month. And you didn't tell me. I'm telling you now. That's not the same thing." He stood up, walked to the sink, turned on the faucet, turned it off, turned it back around. "So what does this mean?" You're starting a new family? The words landed exactly where he'd aimed them. I'm having another child, I said. That means things change. It does not mean I leave. You always say things like that. I always mean them. He crossed his arms. Does she even want a kid? She's like a CEO. She's keeping the baby. She's serious about it. And you? You're just going to be involved with your boss's baby. I'm going to be involved with my child. He looked at me hard. Then something shifted. Not acceptance. More like the beginning of it. Where am I in this? Right here, I said. Same place. You don't lose anything. He looked toward the window. His jaw was tight. I don't want to act like it's fine if it isn't. You don't have to. But I also don't want to be the reason you don't do the right thing. He said it quietly, like it cost him something. I didn't answer right away. I let it sit. That's not how this works. You're not a reason or an obstacle. You're my kid. He nodded slowly. Then he went upstairs. No door slam, just quiet steps, and a hall light that stayed on under his door until almost midnight. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, looking at the chair where he'd been sitting. By Monday, the office had started to move differently around me. Nothing direct. No one at Whitfield Group was foolish enough to gossip openly, but people paused conversations when I walked past. A senior project coordinator asked me too casually whether I'd noticed anything different about Sloane's calendar. Finance seemed to be having a lot of closed-door conversations that stopped when I walked by, and then came the call from Richard. Richard Whitfield Jr. was Sloane's older brother. He had never officially run the company. Their father had chosen Sloane, which Richard had accepted, with the kind of polished grace that meant he had never actually accepted it at all. He sat on the board. He had investors who were loyal to him personally. He had, over the years, inserted himself into enough decisions to be a weight the company carried without fully acknowledging. Sloane had mentioned him the way people mention a recurring weather pattern, not with surprise, just with a particular kind of resignation. His assistant called me at 2 in the afternoon. Mr. Whitfield would like to have a brief conversation. Are you available at 4? He met me in a conference room on the 22nd floor. Not his office, not a restaurant, a neutral space with a long table and a city view and no personal touches. He was in his mid-40s, graying at the temples in the way that looked deliberate on him, wearing a jacket over a dress shirt in that casual, expensive way that required money to pull off. He shook my hand like he was doing me a favor. Nathan, he said, using my first name like he'd known me for years. I appreciate you making time. Of course. He gestured to a chair. I sat. He sat across from me, not at the head of the table, but close enough to it. I'll be direct, he said. I think you're a talented project manager. Sloane has relied on you well. The Atlanta build would have been a mess without your involvement. Thank you. That's the reason I wanted to speak with you personally. He folded his hands. Because I think you understand what's at stake for this company, and I think you're smart enough to see the full picture. What picture is that? He looked at me steadily. Sloane is going to lead this company for a long time. That is what I want. That is what my father built toward. But right now, she is in a vulnerable position. A pregnancy, an unplanned one, linked publicly to a company employee that creates a narrative that the board, the investors, and frankly the market will use to question her judgment. I'm aware of how it looks. I don't think you're fully aware of what it costs her. He leaned forward slightly. Which is why I'm here. Not to threaten you, not to be the villain in your story, but to offer you something that takes this off the table cleanly. He slid a folder across to me. I didn't open it. What's in there? I asked. A private arrangement. Generous. Your employment would be transitioned to a senior role at one of our partner firms. Equal title, better benefits, no awkward optics. Your son's college education fully funded through a private trust, and a support arrangement for the child that is more than adequate, managed discreetly. I looked at the folder, and in exchange I said, I disappear from the picture. You remain the biological father. You're simply not the public story. I sat with that for a second. He waited. He was good at waiting. The kind of patience that comes from a lifetime of knowing other people need time to talk themselves into things. Does Sloane know you're doing this? I asked. Something moved behind his eyes. Just briefly. Sloan wants what's best for the company. That's not an answer. It's the correct one. I put my hand on the folder and pushed it back across the table toward him. I'm not signing out of my child's life, I said. Not for a job title. Not for a trust fund. Not for cleaner optics. He didn't look angry. That was the strange part. He looked like a man recalculating a projection. You have a son, he said. You understand what public scrutiny does to a family, to a child. Tobias is 14. His name could be part of this. I felt my hands go still under the table. There it is. Don't do that, I said. I'm naming a reality. You're using my son as a pressure point. That's not the same thing. He held my gaze. I'm trying to protect everyone here, including you. Then keep Tobias's name out of your math. I stood up. Not dramatically. Not fast. Just done. Write in the comments, I said. Was I right to walk away from Richard's offer? Or should I have protected my son and stepped back? I was a project manager at a real estate company, I continued. I was not irreplaceable in the company's story. But I was irreplaceable in my child's. Those are not the same position, and no folder changes that. I left the conference room. The elevator ride down was quiet. I stood in the lobby for a minute, watching people move through the revolving doors, thinking about Tobias at home, Sloan somewhere in this building, and a baby who didn't exist yet in any visible way but had already rearranged everything. That evening, Sloan called. Richard told me what he did, she said. Her voice was controlled, but under it was something tight and tired. I figured he would. I didn't ask him to. I know. I want you to know that. Sloan. I know. A silence. I was standing in my kitchen in the dark again, which seemed to be where I did all my important phone calls lately. Are you angry? I asked. At him, not at you. A pause. He's not a bad person. He genuinely believes he's protecting me. People who genuinely believe they're protecting you can still do real damage. I know. She was quiet for a second. He's done this before, not with something like this, but he manages situations. He's been managing situations for our family since I was 22. And you? I've been letting him, partly. She said it plainly. Not anymore. I leaned against the counter. What does that mean? It means I'm telling the board on Thursday. On my terms? No invented story about a sperm donor, no strategic ambiguity, no managed narrative. I'm pregnant. The timeline is what it is. My leadership is not in question. That's the statement. I exhaled slowly. That's going to be a hard room. I've had harder ones. I believed her. And Richard? I asked. I told him this afternoon that he doesn't get to negotiate what my child's family looks like. Her voice was steady, but I heard the cost of it underneath. He didn't take it well. No. He'll come around. He loves me in his way. He just loves the company more. I didn't say anything. I just stood there in the quiet kitchen, listening to the sound of her breathing through the phone, thinking about how much it must have taken to say those words to her brother, and then call me afterward like it was just the next item on the list. Are you all right? I asked. A small silence. I'm managing? That's not the same thing. No, she said. It isn't. Another pause. Talk to me about something normal. Tell me something Tobias did. So I told her about how he'd come home that week with a broken bike he found at the curb and had spent 3 days cleaning and repairing it, not for himself, for a kid in his class who'd mentioned offhandedly that his had been stolen. He hadn't made it a big thing. He'd just dropped it off. Sloan was quiet for a moment after I told her. Then she said, You raised that. I try. No, she said. You did. When we hung up, I stood there for a while longer. Something had shifted again, differently than before. Not just a crisis being contained. Something more like two people deciding separately and then together that they were going to stand in the same place. Sloan made the announcement internally the following Thursday. Brief, factual, no apology in it. She said she was expecting a child, that continuity plans were in place, that her leadership remained her priority, and her private life would remain private. The board meeting lasted 2 hours. She didn't tell me what was said in it, but she texted me after, functional. I knew exactly what that meant. Richard did not disappear. People like him never fully do. He sent messages through board allies and family attorneys dressed up as concerned advisement. But Sloane got quieter about it. Not defeated, just efficient. She stopped engaging with every hook. She let some things go unanswered. She forwarded a few to legal without comment. The first time she came to the apartment, Tobias cleaned his room without being asked. He also moved a stack of magazines from the coffee table and wiped down the stovetop, which told me more than anything he could have said out loud about how much this mattered to him even if he wouldn't admit it. "She's going to look at everything," he said, standing in the kitchen. "She's coming to dinner, not a site inspection. She runs a company. She can't turn it off. You don't know that." He gave me the look that meant we both know I'm right. Sloane arrived at 6:15 because apparently being exactly on time wasn't her default, but she'd made an effort. She was in jeans and a dark sweater, which was the most casual I had ever seen her. She was carrying a box of pastries from a bakery I recognized from downtown. "My assistant told me not to arrive empty-handed," she said when I opened the door. "Good advice." She looked past me into the apartment, the narrow hallway, Tobias's sneakers kicked to one side, a school photo on the wall he'd asked me to take down 3 times and that I kept forgetting about. Tobias appeared at the end of the hall and assessed her in about 4 seconds. "Are those from Oleander's?" he asked, looking at the box. "The almond croissants are supposed to be good." "They are. The lemon ones are better." "I got both." He nodded once, like she had answered correctly. Then he went back to the kitchen. I looked at her. She looked at me. Neither of us said anything, but something relaxed slightly in her shoulders. Dinner was not smooth. Tobias asked the kind of direct questions that were actually tests. The kind where the answer mattered less than whether you understood why he was asking. "Do you want to be a mom?" he said halfway through the meal. Sloane set her fork down without drama. "I didn't plan this. But yes, I want this." "Why?" She looked at him. "Because not wanting it felt worse." He chewed that for a second. "Then, what if you're bad at it?" "Tobias," I started. "No," Sloane said. She looked at him steadily. "That's a fair question." She paused. "I don't know. I didn't have a great model for it. My mother was more interested in being impressive than being present. My father the same. So I'm probably going to get some things wrong." "My mom got a lot of things wrong," Tobias said. "I know. But she wasn't, she still exists. She just chose differently." Sloane nodded slowly. "I'm not choosing differently." Tobias looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at me, then back at her. "Okay," he said, and went back to eating. That was it. No declaration, no speech, just okay, which from Tobias meant more than most people's essays. After dinner, he showed her a video of a robotics demonstration his school had done. She watched the whole thing and asked which kid was operating which part of the machine and whether the design was the student's own or a kit. He answered seriously. She listened seriously. They were both very earnest about it and neither of them seemed to notice. When she left, she stopped at the door. Tobias was already back in his room. "He's something," she said. "He's a lot. I mean that as a compliment." "I know." She looked at me for a second. Just looked, without calculating it. Then her phone buzzed and I watched her face close before she even reached for it. "Richard," she said, glancing at the screen. She didn't pick up. 3 months later, the announcement went public. A short paragraph on the company's website. Confirmed in a regional business journal. No father named. No dramatic framing. Sloane Whitfield, CEO of Whitfield Group, was expecting her first child. Her leadership team remained in place. The company remained focused on its growth targets. The comments online ranged from supportive to invasive, which was expected. A few people in the industry made knowing remarks. Richard put out a statement about the company's strength that was technically about the company and also about himself. Sloane read it, set her phone down, and said to me later, "He can have that one." We had started building something that didn't have a clean name yet. A shared calendar. Dinners at the apartment twice a month, then more. Tobias teaching Sloane how he organized his robotics parts, which she found genuinely interesting in a way that surprised us both. Me driving her to a prenatal appointment one Tuesday morning and sitting in the waiting room reading a parenting magazine from 2021 and pretending I wasn't nervous. She came out of the appointment and sat next to me and said, "Everything looks good." Good. The heartbeat is. She stopped. Something moved across her face that I had not seen there before. Not the CEO, not the person managing the situation. Just her. It's real, she said quietly. Yeah, she looked at the magazine I was holding. That issue is 4 years old. I know, the advice about sleep training is still contested, she laughed. Genuine, unguarded, the kind she used to catch and correct. She didn't catch it this time. One evening in the fall, we were sitting on my apartment balcony after Tobias had gone inside. The city was going quiet the way it did around 9, not silent, just softer. She had her feet pulled up on the chair and a cup of tea she'd barely touched. Richard called this morning, she said. He wants to have lunch next week. Are you going? Yes. She looked out at the skyline. He's my brother. He did something wrong and he knows it. We're going to have to find a version of this that works. Does he want to? He will, she said. When the baby is here and it's real to him, he'll shift. He loves things once they exist. He just has trouble with the uncertainty before. I looked at her. That sounds like a generous read. I've known him for 40 years. She paused. It's the accurate one. I leaned back in my chair. The city hummed below us. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. When you told me you weren't walking away, in my office, that first day, were you scared? I thought about it honestly. Yes. Of what? All of it. Tobias's reaction. The job. What people would say. Whether you actually wanted me involved or whether you were just being decent about it. She was quiet for a moment. I didn't know, at first, she said, whether I wanted you involved. I knew I wanted the baby. You were. I didn't have a category for you yet. And now, she looked at me then, fully, without managing it. Now you're in a category I'm still naming. I reached over and put my hand over hers on the armrest. She didn't pull back. She looked at our hands, then at me. I don't know how to do this without my instinct being to run a risk assessment, she said. I don't know how to do this without worrying about how Tobias is sleeping. We're both terrible at this. We're both trying, I said. She turned her hand under mine and held it. Didn't say anything. Just held it, with the city below us and the lights coming on one by one across the skyline. Later that week, Tobias asked me, out of nowhere, while I was making dinner, is she going to be around a lot? I think so. Does that bother you? He considered it. She takes things seriously, he said. I respect that. High praise. Don't make it weird. Noted. He grabbed an apple from the bowl on the counter. Then, at the door to the kitchen, he stopped. Dad, yeah, the kid's going to be lucky, he said. Having you. He walked out before I could say anything. I stood at the stove for a second, spatula in hand, and had to take a breath. That was the thing about Tobias. He had always known, without being told, what the most important sentence in a room was. And he always waited until I was looking somewhere else to say it. The baby arrived on a Thursday morning in March. 6 pounds, 12 ounces. A girl. We named her Wren, which was Sloane's suggestion, which Tobias said sounded like a password but eventually admitted was actually good. He held her once, carefully, in the hospital room, with both arms rigid, like he was afraid of doing it wrong. She grabbed his finger. He looked down at it, and something in his face went very quiet and very open. Hey, he said softly, not to me, not to Sloane, just to her. I stood by the window and watched the city below and thought, this did not start right. It started by accident in a restaurant where everyone was performing, with 2 people briefly forgetting the versions of themselves they were supposed to be. It started with a folder on a conference table and a phone call in a dark kitchen, and a teenager who cleaned a stovetop he didn't have to clean. But here we were, the 4 of us in a hospital room on a Thursday morning, not a family anyone would have drawn on purpose, just the one we kept choosing to be.